Make sure we're live, which I think we are by the looks of it. So, evening everyone. You'll be glad to see take two. I've actually got Mark here, so it's a better stream than the last one we did already, or didn't do. Words to that effect. So I've got Mark Collett here, leader of Patriotic Alternative. We continue to invite interviews of interesting guests at the moment. There's going to be 4 topics I'm going to discuss with Mark tonight. One's his background in politics. Very interesting background, I'd say. Time with Nick Griffin in the BNP, where now he leads his own organisation. I'm going to move on to a recent Panorama documentary to do with the Southport killings and donations his organisation made to some of the people that got arrested. Then we're going to move on to British identity. What does it mean to be British? Who are the British or the English? And then the last topic will be a nice easy one, the Middle East conflict, the Israel-Hamas conflict. So Mark, without further ado, can you just give us a quick intro to who you are?
Well, my name's Mark Collett. I am the leader and founder of Patriotic Alternative, or a founding member of Patriotic Alternative. Obviously, I didn't found it on my own. There are other founders like Laura Towler. We're an organisation which advocates for the interests of the indigenous people of Great Britain. So that is white Britons. We believe that white Britons are being reduced to a minority. We believe that is being done with malice aforethought. We believe it is not an accident. And we believe that as white Britons become a minority, we are not becoming a minority like other minorities who are protected and given certain legs up in society, given certain benefits for being a minority. We are going to be a hated minority that are despised, picked on and scapegoated for everything that goes wrong in this failing multicultural society.
Thank you for that. So Mark, how did you get involved in politics? When I did a bit of research on you for this stream, it looks like you've been involved for about 20 odd years or so. So where did it all begin for you?
Well, it began for me really at university. When I went to university, I joined a group called the Free Speech Society. We defended the rights of BNP members to study at university because the left-wing students in the Socialist Workers' Party it was called then the Anti-Nazi League, were trying to get BNP students expelled from university. I met these BNP students, discovered I had a lot in common with them. I had grown up near Leicester. Leicester has the sort of dubious honour of being the first city in Britain where white Britons officially became a minority. After seeing that, I realised that wasn't a good thing. It didn't lead to some kind of utopia, quite the opposite. So when I met people from the BNP and found them to be totally reasonable and to be saying things that I believed in, that was something I just wanted to join and be involved in. That was something that I wanted to be part of. And I understood that the only people who were really being denied freedom of speech in Britain, even all the way back then, were people who had something very, very important to say.
So was there actually BNP university, whatever the word is, like society at your university?
Sorry.
Was there a BNP society at your
university? University was very, very odd when it came to societies. Well, not very, very odd. It was very, very sort of typical of what Western nations have become like. So everyone was represented at university, literally everyone. There was a Jewish society, an Afro-Caribbean society. There were societies for Hindus, for Muslims, for every nationality, race, ethnicity and religion, except for white Britain. So there wasn't sort of an English society. There wasn't a Scottish society. There wasn't anything like that for indigenous Brits, but there was something for everyone else. And at numerous universities, and this wasn't just something that happened at Leeds, this was something that happened across the board. Anyone who tried to set up something like the English Society or the Scottish Society or, the British Society, they were told, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. That's not an acceptable development. That's exclusionary, it's racist. But every other group was allowed a society just for them.
Okay. And did people at university, did you make your association membership of the BNP public at the time? And if so, how did that impact your uni experience?
It impacted it in a number of ways, and it was sort of quite difficult for me. I mean, really, when you get involved in a political party, if you're going to be face out and if you're going to stand in elections, which I did when I was at university, I was sort of very much, let's get something done. It does impact you because people campaigned to have me thrown out of the university. People campaigned to have me thrown off my course, banned from the student union. And I had to deal with all kinds of stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, really, for me, it just proved that what I was doing was right. Because if you have something to say, and everyone is so desperate for that to get out, you pretty quickly realize that you've almost got this sort of hidden truth. You know, the truth is being hid from the populace. You're speaking the truth as you see it, and people are desperately trying to stop you. Now, if I was walking around campus saying the earth was flat or, something like that, people might have laughed at me, people might have mocked me, but no one would have tried to have me kicked off campus. No one would have tried to have my university career ended so I couldn't complete my education. But that's what happened to me when it was discovered that I was a member of the BNP. And it pretty much proved everything that I thought, that there was this huge bias against people who held nationalistic views, and that the left would do everything they could to harass and malign those people. Now, fundamentally, that is something that has increased in its frequency since I've grown up. So when I experienced that, it was sort of 2000 to about 2002 when I was at university. Now, actually my first year at university, 99 to 2002 when I was at university. And I experienced all that then. However, since then, things have got a lot worse. And now we live in a time of, cancel culture where you can actually be part of the system, but make one slip up, say one thing wrong, have one difference of opinion with this sort of rabid left-wing mob, and that's it. Your career's cancelled, your life's cancelled, and you're effectively finished. And it must be a lot worse in universities now than it was then. But I kind of feel like I was the canary in the coal mine, because what I went through back, at the turn of the century, probably thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people across the West have been through that now, but I was one of the first people to face that.
It's true what you say about cancel culture. I don't know if you've seen the story today about the EastEnders actor Jay. I don't know his real name. He's worked on the soap for nearly 20 years, and he's made supposedly one comment about a disabled person while on Strictly Come Dancing, and they've chopped him. It's just incredible, like 19, 20 years of work. I'm not aware of his political beliefs at all, but one comment and you're gone. So it's very true about cancel.
Well, it is. And look, we live in a time of unbridled forgiveness where you can do all manner of terrible things. So, for example, today, it's been widely reported in the press that a very senior judge in the UK has just released one of the men who masterminded the July the 7th bombings, the ones that tore the buses to pieces in London.
2005,
yeah. And the judge wished that man all the best. He sort of gave him a glowing sort of goodbye, wished him all the best, told him he'd hope for all the best for that guy. Now, when it comes down to it, that guy's getting a second chance, and people within the establishment are cheering that on. But if you say the wrong thing, if you make an off-color joke, if you make a slightly clumsy comment, if you say something about somebody's race or ethnicity, then all of a sudden your entire life can essentially be cancelled. Everything you've done down the pan. No second chances, no sort of, we'll give him a bit of a do-over on this one because he's done a lot for us. It's game over for you. And I think when you see that and the way it's applied and what it's applied to, you can see there are these major biases in our society that are trying to corral the population into either compliance or silence through fear, because this is a way of propagating fear amongst normal people. Fear to speak your mind, fear that you might be saying the wrong thing or even thinking the wrong thing. And obviously the aim of that is so that people put their heads down and simply comply with the system when they shouldn't really have to comply with the system if they don't like it. We're meant to live in a democratic society. We're meant to live in a society where if you speak your mind, if you say what's on your mind, that's allowed. That's something that should be sort of celebrated and encouraged, because everyone's meant to have their say. But some people can't have their say. You can only really have your say. It's like free speech is only for those who speak what the establishment want them to say.
I agree with the vast majority of that. Isn't the sad reality, though, Mark, that it works? And
Which bit don't you agree?
No, I think the question, moving on. Isn't the sad reality is that it works, and that people can see horrific things happening all over?
Well, look, it's a form of social credit. So when it came out that China was going to have this social credit system, where fundamentally, if you got a tattoo on your face, dropped out of school and didn't talk to your mum and dad, you were going to get negative social credit. Whereas if you completed your studies, helped old ladies across the street, and were respectful to your elders, you'd get positive social credit. The British press, lots of people, on YouTube are outraged, our social credit system, but we already have that. We have a social credit system that's far more brutal than that. It doesn't just give you points, it completely knocks you out of your career, completely destroys your life, makes you a social pariah. And it's not for doing something stupid, or it's not for hurting anyone, it's not for committing a crime. There are people who commit crimes and still get plenty of social credit in Britain. You lose social credit and are completely blackballed for merely holding the wrong opinion, or even questioning core narratives that the state believes in and propagates.
Yeah, and we can see that with the Father Ted writer recently. Much moving on, because we touched on at the start your time in the BNP, which I was sort of a teenager at the time when they were at their height with the European elections. From what I understand, your organisation isn't involved in the electoral route. So can you discuss briefly, before we move on to the next topic, why that is?
Well, I've been involved in electoral politics for 10 years, probably more so than any nationalist in the country, because I was at the very cutting edge. I was standing as a candidate. I was managing the BNP's publicity department. I came up with, designed, and masterminded most of the BNP's most successful campaigns. I was the one that did the European Union campaign, which got 2 MEPs elected, and I was the one that worked with Richard Barnbrook that got the 12 councillors elected in Barking and Dagenham, and then got him elected to the GLA. So I was an integral part of that electoral system. Now, firstly, I know how much work is involved in elections. And secondly, I understand the fundamentals of marketing and essentially ensuring a product has what it needs in order to succeed in a marketplace. And you might be thinking, why are you talking about products? Why are you talking about marketing? We're talking about politics. Well, politics is something which, if you're not good at marketing, you might as well back away and give up. Politics, or people involved in politics, need marketing experts. And they also need people who are brutal realists. Now, for the BNP to get where it was going, it took us a long time. So I joined the BNP in the year 2000. And by 2006, the BNP was doing very well. By 2008, it hit its stride. 2009, the BNP was winning MEPs. And by 2010, it was dead. So I also understand how fragile political parties can be. Now, the BNP grew at a time where UKIP was not really a force to be reckoned with outside of European elections. And that's a key point. You see, if you're bringing a product to market, your product has to firstly have a unique selling point. And secondly, it has to come to market in an area or sector where there aren't a lot of competitors. There isn't room now on the sort of quote unquote dissident right for multiple parties, because Nigel Farage and the Reform Party have got what can be termed a critical mass. They are now so big, They are now talking about deportations. They are talking about remigration. They are talking about stopping the boats. They are talking about immigration control. They're talking about grooming gangs. At that point, and with a number of MPs elected, with a number of mayors, with them winning the last round of council elections by getting the most numbers of councillors elected, you're going to go up against them, and one of two things is going to happen. The first is you're going to get 1% of the vote and look like a gang of idiots. Or secondly, you're going to get 1% of the vote and Reform are going to just miss out on seats because you took 1% that would have gone to them. And at that point, not only do you look an idiot, but you're an idiot who actually stopped a better option beating out Labour or the Conservatives. So there isn't really electorally room at the moment. So if you were looking at this from a marketing perspective, what unique selling point does any nationalist party actually have at the moment? Because most of them are saying things that are so similar to what Nigel Farage is saying, but Nigel Farage is electable, a household name, has hundreds of councillors, MPs and mayors. Why would any rational person choose to vote for the smaller, less established party, which doesn't have even a toehold in politics? Well, they wouldn't. So you're wasting your money, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your effort. Once more, all of these micro parties now that are standing in these elections, they've been around for a couple of years, they failed dismally at the polls. And as I said, for the BNP to get where it was in terms of winning council seats regularly, it took years. And these parties are nowhere near that. Back when I was in the BNP, if you had a paper candidate, just a guy go up on the ballot paper, he might get somewhere between sort of 8 and 20% just for standing. These guys are putting in full campaigns, these micro parties, and getting 1%, 26 votes. It's actually humiliating. So you're either going to do one or two things. You're either going to smash your head or your face, is what I was actually going to say, smash your face into a brick wall, doing something that can't work and isn't actually going to yield results. Or you can do something a little bit different, which is still part of the democratic system, but is not a route that has been closed off by a very, very powerful party, which has got the wind in its sails. Now, I'm not saying there's never going to be a chance for a political party on the dissident right to ever rise again. But if a party does rise again, it would have to be in a post-reform world, in a world where the Reform Party is completely split, shut down and disappeared. Because with Nigel Farage and the Reform Party there, makes it almost impossible for anyone else to get a toehold. So what do? Well, we have three things that we do, and we call them community, advocacy and activism. We build communities. We get involved in advocacy, where we advocate for the good of our people and our community. And we get involved in activism, which is taking the message to the public to help build our community and let people know there's a different group out there. And we do this because we're not throwing thousands of pounds into elections only to get humiliating results. And also, we don't want to go out there and split the vote and add to this sort of toxic brew of little micro parties all fighting for an embarrassingly small handful of votes.
It's quite a convincing answer there, so thank you for that. Very comprehensive. I don't have any follow-up, so we'll just move on to the next topic, which is the Panorama documentary. It was called a few weeks ago now. This was meant to be a couple of weeks ago, Why I Joined a Riot. I found this documentary to be quite disgusting, actually, because as the media always does, it sort of brushes over in a few seconds the cause of the protests and riots, which is the death of 3 little girls, and then focuses all its attention on the people who are protesting or maybe taking things a bit too far. Now, your organization was mentioned in the last few minutes of this show. So can you tell us why your organization made donations to those arrested in the aftermath of the Southport killings?
Well, that's part of what we call advocacy. Now, people say we made donations to people who were arrested. Actually, we made donations. And we want to get this very clear, because it's important that we're right about what we're saying about people. So we made donations to the families of those that we believed were jailed unfairly. So we didn't give money to people who were convicted criminals. We didn't give money to people who participated in riots. We gave money to the families of people we believed were jailed unfairly. And how did we decide if somebody was jailed unfairly? Well, we split those people into 3 categories, and we explained this to the BBC, yet the BBC didn't cover this on their show, which shows just how disingenuous they are. Because this is very important. You know, if you want to give someone a fair hearing, you have to at least understand their mindset. Well, the first group of people that the first group of families we gave money to were families whose family member had been jailed for saying things on social media. We believe that saying things on social media, saying things like there's an invasion coming, or we don't want the invaders, etc., etc., or somebody like Lucy Connolly, we gave £1,000 to her family. We believe it was wrong to jail those people. Secondly, we gave money to the families of people who were jailed for being present when disorder took place. So there was a number of people who were jailed for simply being there. One guy was jailed because he was filming activities that were taking place. Now, if you're there when disorder takes place, but you are not involved in that disorder, there is no way you should get a jail sentence. So we proudly supported the families of people who were jailed for being there when disorder took place. And finally, we gave money to the families of people who were jailed for taking part in acts which did not warrant a jail sentence or were disproportionately harsh. So a great example of this is during the BLM riots, a young black man kicked a police officer. Now, the courts released him and said, look, it was a moment of madness. You were fighting for a just cause, basically. You kicked the police officer, but no real harm was done. Off you trot. Now, a white lad of a similar age kicked a police van in the wake of the Southport murders. He was jailed. Now, I think any rational or reasonable person would say it's much worse to kick another human being than it is to kick a parked motor vehicle. Okay? Yet the white lad was jailed and the black lad wasn't. That's because we have two-tier justice. That's because two-tier justice in this country is largely based around race or ethnicity. So I think the people we supported genuinely deserve that support. I stand by our support for them. I will support other people like them. And I think the fact that BBC did not clearly explain why we supported people and what our mission actually was shows that the BBC knew what we were doing was actually reasonable, or at least knew that the public would think what we were doing is reasonable. Because if the BBC thought what we were doing was unreasonable, they would have read out the statement and said, look, these guys are supporting criminals, etc., etc. But they couldn't say that because we weren't. And the people's families that we did support, they were families who had hit hard times because their loved ones had been victims of two-tier justice.
Thank you for that. There's a couple more points on this. Something, I'll be honest, during the show that did throw me when I heard your organization made a donation to this person is that one of the women was in a lesbian homosexual relationship. Now, based on my knowledge of you and your organization, that did really surprise me. So just did you know that at the time you made the donation? Did that have no bearing?
Well, firstly, the family of the woman who was jailed, we actually gave money to her son's parents. So we gave money to the grandparents. We didn't actually give the money to the lesbian partner. That's the first thing. We gave the money to the grandparents. And secondly, I don't believe in punishing children for what their parents have done. So there might be some nationalists who say, look, we're against same-sex couples, but there was a little boy there who was missing his mum at Christmas, who, was in a situation where those caring for him didn't have the financial resources to give him a good Christmas. And ultimately, I don't see why he should be punished. We treated all the children and families we supported in the same way, and we treated them the same way because their family members had been victims of two-tier justice. And if a lesbian is a victim of two-tier justice, that's just as bad as a straight white man being a victim of two-tier justice. She was a victim of two-tier justice because she was a white woman that protested in a very mild manner. I think the worst thing she did was swore at police officers. So I think sending somebody to jail who's sworn at police officers is absolutely scandalous, especially considering that thousands upon thousands of people walk free from court every year after actually committing sexual offences. So again, this shows this massive disparity in the justice system where people who have done very, very serious things, have committed really serious crimes, are walking free from court with a slap on the wrist, whereas, a lady who shouted at police officers, she had to be jailed. Well, that's scandalous.
Agreed. I can't recall if that's what she was jailed for. No, I'll take your word for it that she was. I can't remember, to be honest with you, from the documentary. And then another point on this that I remember from the show is that the partner in question said that when they learned about your organization during this documentary, that they wouldn't take the money now if they knew.
No, that's completely untrue. What she was saying was completely untrue. I spoke to her on the phone. I said that we were going to give the grandparents money. And I said, look, if this is going to make things uncomfortable for you, we don't have to give you the money. We don't have to give the grandparents the money. Your family doesn't have to benefit from this. And I said, I understand that you guys are from a sexual minority group, that you may well have pressure from the LGBT community to disavow us. This might cause problems for you. And I also said to her, quite honestly, people will contact you and say that you are taking money off a Nazi. If you're not comfortable with that money in any way going to people that you're associated with, tell me. And I said, I will give you 24 hours. I said, I'll give you overnight to sleep on it. You text me in the morning if you're happy being associated with us anyway. Next morning, got a text message. We do want the money. Thank you so much. We sent it.
Oh, was she lying?
She knew who we were.
Was she lying during the documentary then?
She was lying during the documentary, but I don't hold that against her. I want to make this really clear. She was lying in the documentary, but she's been pressured. They've been coerced by the BBC to say that. And look, if she genuinely regrets taking the money, I don't know. She might do, right? If she regrets it that much, she can give it back to us.
Has she offered to pay it back?
What?
Has she offered to pay it back?
No, of course she hasn't.
Look,
I'm not asking for it. I'm not asking for it back. What I am saying is she knew who we were. When we give the money to people, we tell them we're an ethno-nationalist organization, that the state, the media, etc. will call us Nazis. If you're uncomfortable with help from a group like us, you can decline it. We don't, come to people wearing sort of camouflage and pretending to be something we're not. We go to people telling them who we are and what other people call us, because we want to avoid this kind of thing. And of course, I was sort of disappointed that she said what she said, but what she said was categorically, the part about her not knowing who we were, etc., was categorically untrue. She may well regret it. I don't know. I'm not in her head. I don't understand how she feels. She was very polite to me. She understood who we were, and I gave her time to think about it, and she accepted the money. And the money was not directly sent to her. It was sent to the victims' parents, so the grandparents of the children. So there was lots of things in that show which were said about us that simply weren't true. And I think the BBC knew they weren't true. I think that's why the BBC didn't read out my full statement or make it clear who we gave the money to.
Thank you. It was just it was just a propaganda program, let's be honest. It was just, like I say, they deal with the reaction rather than the problem. They sort of spend 5 seconds talking about what prompted everything and then scapegoating 3 people. Thank you, Mark. I don't know if this next topic, actually before that, did you say that your organisation made a donation to Lucy Conley? Did I catch that?
Yeah, we gave £1,000 to her family as well.
Okay. And I haven't seen anything about that. So she's not, if you want to use the term, throwing you under the bus in the same way as that other lady.
She might do. Who knows? I've made a video about Lucy Connolly because I disagree with some of her political stances. But would I still give her the money? Yes, because she was still a victim of two-tier justice. At the end of the day, I'm not here to sort of vet people's private life. If they were out there speaking about the problems that were taking place in this country. They were out there talking about mass migration, talking about the grooming gangs, talking about the murder of white girls by ethnic minorities, and they were jailed unfairly. We will support their family. You know, at the end of the day, there are lots of people who were jailed that probably don't agree with me on everything, probably wouldn't like me, wouldn't like my stance on certain things. But ultimately, we are there to support people in need. That is part of our program of advocacy. We have a group, we discuss amongst ourselves if we think somebody's worthy of that, if they meet the criteria I stated. Lucy did meet the criteria. I'm proud we gave her the £1,000. But yeah, she probably wouldn't agree with me on everything. I'm pretty sure she wouldn't, in fact.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't know if this next topic will be very quick or long. You've touched on it at the start, Mark. So we'll use the term English. Who are the English? Because I asked that because you could ask 10 people in the street and you may get 10 different answers. So from your viewpoint.
Well, the English are a distinct ethnic group. They are the people who built England, the people who have been here for thousands of years in England. They are the indigenous people of England. And you actually asked me before the show who were the British, and obviously I was there. We were talking about the Welsh and the Scottish as well. And the English are a distinct ethnic group, and as such, they should be protected in the same way that any other ethnic group is. But they're not. There is a plot by the government, by the state, by the media, etc., to replace and displace the English, which, as far as I am concerned, amounts to genocide.
So, is someone who's half English and half anything else, Polish, Nigerian, Pakistani, would you class them as half English? Or in your eyes, are they not English at all at that
They're
point?
not English. No, they're not English. Look, if I went to Japan and I lived there and I got Japanese citizenship, would I be Japanese? Well, I'd have Japanese citizenship, but I wouldn't be ethnically Japanese. Now, would my children be ethnically Japanese if they were born there? Well, no, they wouldn't, because both of my children are English. Now, if one of my children married somebody who was Japanese and they had children together, would they be Japanese? Well, no, they would be half Japanese, but they would not be ethnically Japanese. And I am not sure why there's all this controversy about this. And let me explain why. Every 10 years, the government commits to producing a census, which gives us data on the population of people in Britain. Now, Great Britain, i.e. the mainland, is England, Scotland, and Wales. And as I said earlier, the English, the Scottish, and the Welsh are all individual, distinct, and identifiable ethnic groups. I think everyone can agree on that. And on the census, what are those groups termed? They're termed white British. And if you're white British, you tick that box. If you are black African, you tick the box that says black African. If you're black Caribbean, you tick the box that says black Caribbean. If you are mixed, you tick the box that says mixed, mixed white Caribbean, mixed white African, mixed white Asian, mixed white Chinese, mixed white other. These boxes are there. People know what they are. They tick them. The census data comes out and we say, oh, this is the makeup of our population. This is the ages. This is the genders. This is the split by ethnicity, and everybody understands it. But when people bring me on shows, all of a sudden, you know, the debate goes on to, well, what is English? What is indigenous Britain? What is a white Britain? Well, everyone understands what a white Britain is every 10 years when they're given a form and asked to fill it out. In fact, it's not just every 10 years, because every year schools report the ethnicity of school children, maternity wards report the ethnicity of live births. Everyone gets it right. except for when they come on a show, we all have to wring our hands and say, "Oh, but what is a white Britain?" Well, we know what a white Britain is. They're indigenous.
Your definition at the start's fine. I'm curious. If I move it on, I'm just curious.
No. I'm just saying that, like, this is something that people regularly come out with, like, what is a white Britain? But everybody understands this when it comes out in data. Related to live births or school attendance or the census. And fundamentally, the next question people usually ask is, well, what about assimilation? What about people breeding with us and becoming part of us? Well, look, everybody knows that if England was a closed ethno-state and somebody came here from a random country, we'll call it country X, so there's no sort of, oh, why did you pick that country? Country X, and they marry somebody who's English, and they have children, and their children marry other people that are English, etc., etc. After certain generations, a certain number of generations, the children produced would effectively be English. They would be fully assimilated. But when you look at assimilation, there are different levels of assimilation. So if somebody comes from a European country, they are closer to us in terms of ethnicity. Firstly, they're part of the same racial group. Secondly, they will have similar cultures, traditions. They will have most likely similar religious practices and similar sensibilities. Now, they won't be the same as us. They are from a different ethnic group. If I'd married a Swedish girl, she would be from a different ethnic group, and our children would be mixed. But if my mixed half English, half Swedish children then married someone who was English and so on, it would only take a couple of generations for a Swedish woman's offspring to be completely assimilated. But two things change the ability to assimilate, which is how different the immigrants are from the host population and how many immigrants are brought in. So, for example, if
Mark, sorry, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
Because where I wanted this question to go, you've jumped in with assimilation, which is fine. But so obviously, white Britain's fine, English, mixed race, in your opinion, they're not. So then I want to just move it on. So say you have a mixed race person and an English person. So I'll use the example, I've got it written down here. I don't know if you're into your football, is Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer's in England and Chelsea international. He's 3/4 English. He's a quarter black, basically. Now, for all intents and purposes, if you looked at him, if you walked past him on the street, you would think he is English. His surname's Palmer. Until it was pointed out to me, I had no idea he had a foreign background. At what point is it as soon as someone's not 100%, they're never English? He's 75%, as far as I'm aware. If he is a kid, then with a white and English person, it'd be 87.5. At what point then would the offspring, if you see what I mean, become English again, or is that not possible in your view?
Well, just saying, eventually it does happen. Assimilation is something that can happen. Groups can be assimilated into a host population, but assimilation is far easier when you take in small numbers of people who are very similar to the host group. So a small number of Swedish women coming to England would not have a huge impact on the English people. They would be very easily assimilated. But a large number of Nigerians, who are much larger in number and much more different from an ethnic and racial perspective, would be much harder to assimilate. And what we are seeing now is such vast numbers of migrants, and those migrants are so different to us in terms of ethnicity, in terms of race, in terms of culture, in terms of tradition. Assimilation then becomes absolutely impossible. And at that point, what you start to see is the complete breakdown of society, because Britain or England, Scotland or Wales, the constituent nations, all change to such a degree that they no longer are recognizable to the indigenous people. So now there are parts of England which are completely Muslim or completely black. There's 72 schools in Britain on the mainland without a single white British pupil. So when you talk about immigration, when you talk about ethnicity, when you talk about the ability to absorb other groups, those groups have to come in a small number, and they have to be preferably more similar to the host group. Now, both of those conditions are not being met. So pre-1945, the vast majority of immigrants that had ever come to Britain were white Europeans. So they were very, very similar to us in terms of their culture, their tradition. They were part of the same wider racial group, people of European descent, Europeans. Now what we're seeing is much, much larger numbers, and those people come from areas like the four largest nations that now immigrate into Britain are China, India, Pakistan, and India. It's not the same as bringing in a small amount of Frenchmen, a few Germans, and a couple of Swedish ladies, is it? It's completely different, both in terms of the size and the differences with the host nation. And this creates the problems that we have today.
No, thank you for that. No, I was generally curious for your views on that. And moving on, in the same topic, moving on, if your organisation isn't going down the electoral route, do you believe that reform, based on what you're saying, I think you consider them the best bet, do you think they will do mass deportations, remigration? Do you have faith in them, or not at all?
I have some faith in them. I don't really think reform are going to solve all the problems. I don't think Nigel Farage has what it takes. And I think those looking for widespread remigration, not just deportations, but actual remigration, are ultimately going to be disappointed. And I produced a long form video called Remigration is Not Inevitable. And I said that I don't think any politician in Britain, Nigel Farage or otherwise, would have the guts to actually do what is necessary in order to bring about widespread remigration. And that's largely because when you look at the population pyramid, when you look at the demographic structure of Britain, the most diverse demographic can be found in maternity wards, and the most homogenous can be found in old people's homes. And there isn't, at the moment, white British births make up just 51.2% of all live births in England and Wales. So we are on the cusp of being a minority in maternity wards. And 39.5% of all children born in England and Wales are born to couples where at least one parent is foreign born. Now, at that point, unless you have a politician coming to power who is willing to start saying we need to basically be looking at the maternity wards in the primary schools, and we need to start remigrating the children who were born to foreign parents, which I don't think is ever going to happen because no one's going to have the guts to do it, you're not going to solve the problem. Now, do I think Farage would actually try to deport people? Yes. Do I think Farage would try to stop the boats? Yes. But Farage's solutions are solutions that would have worked in the 1970s. So simply restricting migration, stopping illegal immigration, and deporting illegals would have solved the problem in the 1970s. To solve the demographic shift now, you would need a much more radical approach. And that's not going to be Nigel Farage. But it's also not going to be any of these so-called leaders that start these micro parties, the ones that you have on this show, because they all start talking the talk, but as soon as they think that the public might be listening, they change their tune and sort of reevaluate it, because they think, oh, we can't scare people by telling the truth that we're going to need to send all these, millions of people home, including, hundreds of thousands of children. They're not going to say that. So at that point, it all becomes pointless anyway. The reason I support Nigel Farage, and the reason I think reform are a good bet, is because reform are like a wrecking ball. And basically, they are destroying mainstream establishment politicians, and they are causing a realignment in British politics, which is something we need. Essentially, they're like the bulldozer that is destroying the old establishment parties. So for that, I can get on board. I can get on board with the bulldozing of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. Do I think Farage is going to be the be-all and end-all who's going to solve all our problems? So I might as well just pack up today and go back to playing computer games and spending time with my son and daughter. No, I can't do that because he's not going to deal with the problems. Farage might slow down the transition to white Britain's becoming a minority, but he certainly isn't going to stop it or turn things around. We're going to be a minority by 2050 if trends continue. And that is something that's very, very scary. And I don't think there's anyone in Britain who has even a single elected representative that would actually seriously do anything about that. And I'm probably one of the only people who knows all these facts, can speak like this, understands what the solutions are, and that is why I'm so deplatformed.
Do you think, before we move on to the final topic, that Reform will win a majority? It doesn't have to be an all answer, this one, at the next election.
Reform have... Basically, Reform are like that. You obviously know something about football. You've mentioned football a few times. This is like I'm not really a huge, but you'll understand this analogy. Reform are like the breakaway striker that's caught the keeper napping, outside his box, and they're running towards the goal, ball at their feet, and all they've got to do is put it in the back of the net. Now, at that point, everyone in the crowd is either thinking, oh my God, they're going to score and we're going to be a goal down, or yes, we're going to score and we're going to be a goal up. But it's not a foregone conclusion until the ball's in the back of the net, because that striker can sky it over the bar, he can trip over the ball, he can fluff it in some way. Sure. And what I'm saying is, Farage is that guy who has broken away, the ball's at his feet, and he's got to slot it in the back of the net. But there is one guy who can put a stop to that can screw it all up and ruin it. And that is Nigel Farage. He can blow up his own party. He can sink the ship. He can ruin it for himself. So if there was a general election today, Reform would win. Would they win an outright majority and be able to form a government? I don't know. But they would win. They would be the largest party. Will that be the case when there is a general election? Well, we will know depending on how Farage plays his cards. And Nigel Farage is probably one of the three most successful post-war politicians in British history, the other two being Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. However, and he's one of the few politicians that has caused lasting changes to Britain. Thatcher did. She dismantled industry. She changed the whole makeup of the class system. Blair truly began mass immigration, and he ushered in a load of fundamental changes to the structure of society, placing power into the hands of quangos and special groups that could essentially carry on Blairite politics even after he was voted out. So both Blair and Thatcher were very successful. They made changes. But so did Farage. Farage is the only person who outside of the mainstream has won a national election. And he has done it multiple times. He won 2 European elections, one as UKIP, one as the Brexit Party, and he recently won a round of council elections as Reform. So for somebody outside of the system to win 3 national elections, that's pretty damn impressive. And he also brought about Brexit. So he is a smooth operator. He's certainly not an idiot, but he is somebody that has a habit of falling out with other influential people around him. He fell out with Robert Kilroy Silk. He fell out with Rupert Lowe recently. And he does this. He falls out with people that he should remain friends with. And he seems to find it difficult to build a team of talented people because he seems to fear losing the limelight to people. And that's an unfortunate trait. So on one hand, he obviously believes in himself, and that spurs him on and he achieves great things, but at the same time he can't stand sharing that limelight with anyone else. And sometimes that kind of ego does get people places, but it can also be the kind of thing that brings them down, as we've seen with people like Elon Musk. You know, he couldn't share the limelight with Donald Trump, and they had this big crash out and fallout, and it was very unfortunate. And I hope that Farage can hold it together, can build a party, and effectively destroy the Conservatives and the Labour Party and resign both of those parties to the history books. That's what we need. But whether he will fluff it between now and the general election, who knows? A week can be a very long time in politics.
Absolutely. I guess we've got 3 or 4 years to go. Mark, thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to the last topic of the night, which is the Middle East conflict. Can I just get, because when you see the sort of right-wing figureheads like Tommy Robinson, they're very pro-Israel. From my research into you, I don't think that's the case, to put it mildly. So can you give me your overall views of the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Israel are the problem in the Middle East. They control America, they control Britain, they leverage their power over Western nations to allow themselves to commit genocide and destabilize the Middle East. They've already destroyed Syria, bombed Lebanon, destabilized Iran. They were the cause behind the Iraq war, destabilizing Iraq and leading to the rise of ISIS. They have funded terrorist and militant groups which commit terrorism in the West, and they do all this to destabilize the Middle East to ensure they're the top dogs in the region. But that leads to a knock-on effect, because this destabilization leads to hundreds of thousands of people that we don't want in Europe fleeing their nations, heading to Europe, and it leads to a demographic catastrophe on European shores. Essentially, Israeli foreign policy and Israeli control of the West has done two things. It has built a genocidal terrorist ethno-state for Jews in the Middle East, and it has also done absolute wonders for the replacement of the European people. That policy has led to Europeans being forced to the brink of minority status in multiple countries. Those are the effects of essentially living in countries ruled by Israel, which is what Britain and America are.
So when you talk about the movement of people from Gaza and the West Bank to Europe, why, in your opinion, do the Egyptians not let their fellow Arabs, their fellow Muslims in? Why do they have such a strong border? Why would they not let them in when they're fleeing?
Because they've got common sense. These people are intelligent. They don't want a load of people who aren't them coming into their country. They say, look, we're Egyptians. We're not Palestinians. But we don't want Palestinians. If they come here, they're going to take over areas. They're going to import their culture. There might be clashes with ethnic Egyptians. You know, they're going to need to be propped up. They're going to need a social state. They're going to need aid. They're going to need houses built for them. It's going to put pressure on our health service, on our economy. It will put pressure on our infrastructure. We don't want them here. There's 2 million Gazans. Why would we want them here? Why would we want them to make life worse for Egyptians? It's a common sense point of view. The only people who don't act in that manner are European countries or countries founded by Europeans. So Western nations don't act in that manner. Every other nation does. I mean, recently, I think it was it Afghanistan that deported other ethnic groups? Pakistan does it. Iran's done it.
Yeah.
All of these countries regularly collect and deport people who shouldn't be living there. The only countries that don't do this are countries ruled by Europeans. We've been brainwashed into this idea that creating some utopian rainbow nation is going to be the best thing, which it is not. And we obviously discussed this earlier. We know what the problems are that are brought by multiculturalism. But every time Israel destabilizes the Middle East, the people fleeing the Middle East come to European shores. And with them come many people who are opportunists, who are criminals, sometimes terrorists, people who are hidden amongst so-called refugees that come to European shores, not because they are seeking refuge, but because they are seeking to take European nations for a ride, and often seeking to do terrible things to people of European descent. So this creates a real security issue. And it's amazing, isn't it, that whilst Israel has this solid border walls, guards, a well-funded, defense force that sits watching its own borders, Jews in the West who support Israel curiously call for open borders in countries like the UK. So you've got, the British Board of Deputies, the most powerful Jewish group in Britain, and they support Israel, which is a closed-bordered ethno-state, yet they support open borders here in the UK. Why is that? Why the hypocrisy? Why, if Jews get an ethno-state in the Middle East, can't the English have an ethno-state in England? Why can't the Welsh have Wales? Why can't the Scots have Scotland? Why do we have to have multiculturalism, but they get a bolt hole in the Middle East for their own people, where they can, clothe themselves in their own culture, tradition, religion, ways of life, be around their own people? Curious.
And when you watch shows like Piers Morgan and other talk shows, a lot of Israeli commentators will say if Hamas released the hostages, everything would be over tomorrow. Is that a view? Do you think they're lying when they say that? And they want to expand Israel into Gaza?
I think what happened on October the 7th was something that was allowed to happen by Israel. There is no way that a group of Palestinians on homemade hand gliders fooled the most sophisticated intelligence agency in the world. That was allowed to happen to justify the full-scale invasion of Gaza. And what has happened there since then has been a series of genocidal terrorist attacks. And I'll just draw people's attention to this, because this is very, very important. Very, very important. When you actually look at what's going on in Gaza and you see Israel's response, let's liken this to what happened in Northern Ireland back in the Troubles in the 70s and 80s. When the IRA bombed Britain, Britain didn't raise every Irish Catholic estate in Northern Ireland to the ground, starve the people, shoot them, bomb them, destroy their hospitals, starve their women and children. Well, of course we didn't, because it would have been called a war crime. The world would have gone crazy. There would have been sanctions against Britain. In fact, normal British people would have been up in arms saying, look, you can't do this. It's terrible. You're killing little babies that had nothing to do with this. Yeah, people did terrible things and they should be held accountable. But you can't kill women and children as a way of getting back at those people. But that's exactly what Israel is doing. Now, when you look at the death tolls, Israel has killed tens of thousands of people, and most of them have been civilians, and many of them have been women and children. There is now a famine in Gaza. There has been the targeted destruction of hospitals, key infrastructure, people's homes. There has been a blockade of humanitarian aid. There has been attacks on people from the media who are trying to report on this. There has even been targeted attacks on people who have brought humanitarian aid into the region. That means that this is unquestionably a series of war crimes that amount to genocide. Now, at that point, whatever Israel claims the Palestinians did to them has been outweighed many, many times over. Gaza has been razed to the ground. That is a disproportionate response, and it's a disproportionate response that only one nation the world over could get away with. And that tells you how powerful Israel is. It tells you who owns the Western media, and it tells you whose pockets the Western media are in. Because if Russia had caused that much devastation in the Ukraine, if Putin had literally razed Kiev to the ground, if Putin was shooting foreign aid volunteers in the Ukraine and ensuring every hospital was on fire and burning to the ground, what would the media say? But Netanyahu can do that and he can still visit the West as a dignitary. Who controls the West? Well, it's not people of European descent, that's for sure. Who controls the West? The answer is Israel. And all you have to do is watch my old videos on AIPAC, on the Israel lobby, on how foreign wars such as the war in Iraq were led by Israeli intelligence. You just look at all of this and you can see who is running the Western world. And it isn't working out well for white people.
Mark, that brings us up to near enough the hour mark. I wanted to thank you very much for your time tonight. I've really enjoyed the discussion, especially that bombshell at the end there. You think it was a false flag event. I have seen that some commentators, even Charlie Kirk and some, allude to it. In two minds on that one myself. But if you want to give yourself a quick outro, I'll do what I do for all my other guests. I'll put a couple of links into. I don't think you're on Twitter. I talk to all my guests on Twitter usually, but you had to do via email. So take it away.
Well, look, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure being here tonight. I've really enjoyed this. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. Dan's been really good. He's asked me a series of questions, very, very respectful. I'm sorry we couldn't make it work the first time. It was generally sort of a technical sort of disaster, but it wasn't really anyone's fault. And I'm pleased we finally did it. He's a really nice guy. Give the guy a sub, help him along with his channel. You guys know where to find me. I do regular shows. This guy's just getting started, and he is a very personable interviewer. He's somebody who obviously puts time and care and effort into this, and he's been good to his word and let me speak freely. So thank you so much for that, Dan, and all the best for the future.
No, brilliant. Mark, thank you very much for your time. And in the live chat, thanks for all of you, lots of viewers live tonight, Mark. So thank you for that as well with your audience. And yeah, all the best, everyone. Enjoy your evening.